What is going on, guys? This is Justice League Battle from Metropolis Expert and Ryan, and we are in my basement for today. And since it is the off season, we're trying something a little bit different. We don't know if you guys will like it, but we're trying something. And in today's video, what are we going to be discussing, Ryan?
We are going to be discussing the top 9 coasters of Six Flags St. Louis, our home park.
Yeah, so this is the park that we've both been to the most, and we figured that the best way to start off this possible series is to discuss the coasters that we've ridden the most. And so how this is going to work, we're going to take turns going through each of the coasters that we've ridden at this park. And like, for example, I think he'll start us off with his number 9, then I'll go to my number 9, and then so on and so forth until we get to number 1. So Ryan, what is your number 9 coaster at Six Flags St. Louis?
My number 9 coaster at Six Flags St. Louis is the River King Mine Train. Now, where this coaster really shines is at night. I would say it's an average mine train, and it does have a really good final drop into the tunnel.
I'll add some of my opinions on River King Mine Train when we get to it. So that is your number 9 coaster. For me, my number 9 coaster is not River King Mine Train, but it is Pandemonium. You may be surprised that I ranked Pandemonium as dead last in the park, but for whatever reason, no matter how many times I ride it, even if the car's off balanced, it rarely spins. Since it's a spinning coaster, you think it's supposed to spin a lot. Well, given the fact that I rarely get ridiculously good rides, even if the car's off balanced, it means that I can't rank it too high. Now, when it does spin, it is great. And there are still some elements that are really good even when it's not spinning, especially like the helixes towards the middle of the ride, and even the drop off of the last block zone. That is really good and can give some great airtime depending on which way you're facing. And Pandemonium is also a really good night ride. So that is our number 9 coaster. Ryan, number 8, hit it.
Number 8 is the Boomerang, relocated from Six Flags Over Texas. And it's just another Boomerang, but this one seems to run a little bit rougher than the other ones that I've been on. It's intense, and it's just another coaster that we have at Six Flags St. Louis.
My number 8, that is where I have River King Mine Train at. The final drop into the tunnel, like Ryan said, was really good, especially in the back car, because you really can't see it coming because you're getting pulled into the tunnel at a pretty decent speed, and then you just get yeeted over that drop, and it's great. Even though the back seat is by far the best seat on the ride, I still think that the front row can deliver some good laterals. And the last time I rode River King Mine Train was actually up front, and coming into the final brakes, I forgot how good that pop of airtime was, but it's still nowhere near as good as the drop into the tunnel in the back car. That is why River King Mine Train takes my number 8 spot.
My number 7 place would be Pandemonium. Now, I really didn't like this coaster when I first started being an enthusiast because it always made me dizzy. But once I got to do more rides and more rides, it kept on getting better. And once we got an off-balance ride, I wasn't feeling sick anymore, and I was just really enjoying all the whip that we got from spinning around really quick. And the drops off the mid-course on the second block zone is really good, and the airtime hill after that is really good. And the helixes right before that part are really good as well.
So yeah, I forgot to mention this when I was discussing Pandemonium, but Ryan and I started riding Pandemonium more frequently during multiple of our trips over the summer, and you in particular didn't have the best of luck with Pandemonium because that thing stole your hat at one point.
It did steal my hat at the beginning of the season. I think it was our second visit.
I think it was, I forget if it was July 13th or July 20th when it stole your hat, but it was one of those two.
Yes. Basically, on the first drop, it flew off on going up.
I thought you said it was the...
It was going up onto the Wild Mouse section.
Yeah, basically, like, he somehow lost it there, which I'm surprised it was there that got him and not the first drop.
Yeah.
But, anyway, Pandemonium, that was his number 7. For me, my number 7, I think I have Ninja. Yes, Ninja's my number 7. It may be really controversial to rank this coaster not at dead last in the park because this coaster seems to be wildly hated by a lot of other people. And I admit, I have ridden it on its bad days. And when it runs bad, it can be really bad. But I still think it's a good ride for what it is. Like, the last time he and I rode it was at night during Fright Fest, and it was actually surprisingly great. It tracked quite smoothly, actually, and I've never thought it necessarily tracked too rough, but it can definitely be quite jerky, especially in the Sidewinder. But even that we didn't think was that bad last time we rode it. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, we were graying out on some of the elements. Yeah, the helix, and then I think there was something else in the ride, but that's not even mentioning the head chopper coming out of the Sidewinder. That is an absolutely insane part of the ride, and definitely one of the better elements in the park, to be honest with you, just because of the head chopper.
My number 6 is Ninja, which is very controversial because I really like that ride. Like, I didn't used to like it, then I started getting back into it, and then I lost its popularity when it hurt my shoulders that one time. But this past time to Fright Fest on that Friday and Sunday, front row ride on Friday redeemed itself and put it 3 spots higher than what it was originally ranked. And then that back row night ride on the last day of the season, the drop really popped me out of my seat. And the only rough spot on that whole ride, I would say, is the Sidewinder.
Yeah, that's one thing I forgot to mention when discussing Ninja, is that the first drop when you're in the back of the train can deliver some really good airtime. But that being said, I still do think it's slightly better in the front. Well, actually, not slightly, it's significantly better in the front, because I did ride the back of the train last year, and it was definitely not smooth. Like, it was rough for sure, but I was honestly expecting worse. My number 6 is Boomerang. This is a coaster that I feel like can get a little too much hate at times. Like, for me, it's really darn intense, and it also delivers an underrated night ride, in my opinion. I've only ridden it, I think, twice at night, and both times I've ridden it at night, it was extremely disorienting, because it was already intense enough, but then when you have the fact that it's dark out, it makes everything seem way more intense. And this is one of the Boomerangs that does run with the Aero train, so I think that is why, Ryan, you said that was earlier.
I say the Vekoma trains run smoother than the Aero trains.
Yeah, because I've done a few Boomerangs with the Vekoma trains, especially like the ones that, like Flying Cobra's at Carowinds, that has the Vestra trains, which I think that's like great. I think Worlds of Fun's Boomerang is also rumored to get Vestra trains for next year.
Sidewinder at Hershey Park, that's the one I did with the Vestra trains.
Yeah, that now operates as a Jolly Rancher Remix. But Boomerang, overall, like really intense ride, and the vertical loop going forwards or backwards, it's really, really intense for sure. And definitely a ride that I feel like I should start doing more often because I think it's awesome.
Now we get into the top 5.
Yeah, these are like the 5 that chances are, when you talk about Six Flags on the list, these are most likely the coaches that you'll see in people's top 5s. So what is your top 5?
So my top 5 starts off with a clone. Batman the Ride at the front of the park, right when you walk into the right, is... I think this is my favorite Batman clone that I've done. Out of the 5 I've done, this one is the most intense, and it runs consistently. And the whip that this thing has is probably the whippiest invert I've ever been on, honestly. But it's not my favorite invert. That honor goes to Alpengeist. But this ride really kicks the intensity up a notch from the other Batman clones that I've done.
Funnily enough, that's also my number 5. I also have Batman as 5th best in the park, and I'm going to echo a lot of what he said, and I do think that sometimes the one at St. Louis or the one at Over Georgia can go like neck and neck, because both are absolutely insane rides, and sometimes like St. Louis I feel like runs more intense than the one at Six Flags Over Georgia. Although the last time he and I rode it was Fright Fest a few weeks ago. We got front row night ride. It was running really solid.
Yes, very solid.
And one thing in particular that caught me off guard, the second corkscrew. Like, currently my favorite corkscrew is the first one that is found on the Incredible Hulk coaster. The intensity on the second corkscrew of Six Flags St. Louis's back clone was rivaling that of Hulk, which I didn't expect. Like, it was wild. And on top of that, the first drop in the back row really throws you, and it's overall a really solid ride, but I feel like it's not quite good enough to be in the top 5. And actually, up until recently, it was in my top 5 in the park, but it recently got pushed out. So, what could be in the top 4? What is your number 4?
It's very turned off.
Oh boy. Well, sorry for the inconvenience. We just had a camera error, so we're back. Anyway, Ryan, what was your number 4?
My number 4 is Screaming Eagle, built in 1976, PTC Woody. It was a very, very good ride, and it was one of my favorite coasters when I was growing up. I think it was top 5 in my coaster count for a while until I did some trips. But anyway, first drop, nothing special. There is a lot of airtime on this ride, but it's not strong until you get to the last part of the ride. There's these little turnarounds And then if you're sitting in the back row, you get launched out of your seat going down the drops. It's the strongest moment of airtime, I think, in the whole park, but maybe you have something to say otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I think I might disagree with you on that, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
My number 4. I said that Batman was number 4 originally, but that got pushed down to number 5 until the last time I rode American Thunder. I know this was Ryan's favorite ride in the park, but... Oh, spoiler alert, sorry, flip. Anyways, American Thunder. I used to think that this ride was kind of an afterthought, because when I was growing up, like, Ryan said he rode Screaming Eagle quite a bit when he was growing up. For me, I had ridden, like, River King Mine Train and Pandemonium before. Like, American Thunder was, like, my first, like, really big coaster in the park, I guess you could say. It was a really solid ride back then, and it still holds up to this day. But ever since I rode more coasters, I feel like it's just been outclassed by a lot of the new stuff. And on top of that, it's been running, I feel like, very inconsistent as of late. Like, some days it runs really good and delivers really good airtime. Other times it's not quite as good. But when American Thunder does run good, it can be really great. First drop in the back row, good airtime, and really there's quite a few good airtime moments on the ride that really are firing when the ride's hauling. Especially the double down near the start and then the triple bunny hills at the end. Those all deliver some great airtime. And also, the drop out of the fan curve can be really good as well. I still go back and forth on whether I prefer the front row or the back row on this ride, because some days I like the front row better, sometimes I like the back row better. I feel like it really depends on how good the ride is running. And American Thunder, I feel like it's not quite as smooth as it probably should be. I mean, granted, it is going on like 15 years of operation. So, I mean, I'm just glad it's not rougher, and I think there definitely are some rougher wooden coasters out there than American Thunder. But overall, I feel like American Thunder is still a really solid ride, and it's top 4 in the park for right now, but it's nowhere near my top 3. Like, all my top 3 coasters are, I think, in my top 15, actually, so they're really high up there.
Well, my top 3 start off with the Boss, and I would say this is the best night ride at Six Flags St. Louis, without a question. It goes back into the woods, comes back, does it again, and then you go all the way around back and come back into the brake run. It is the longest ride at Six Flags St. Louis, and I would say this Woody was built for intensity. Not for airtime, but for sheer intensity. This coaster has some actually really good, decent moments of airtime. Like, if you're in the back row on the first drop, you'll get some good airtime on it. Drop off the mid-course, good airtime. And then the double up into the final brake run always gives ejector airtime every single time. No matter how cold it's running, it just flings you out of your seat every time. People say that it's getting rough and it should be RMC'd. Well, I say if it does happen, I won't be too upset, but we'll be missing a pretty good coaster if it does happen.
For my number 3, that is where I have Screaming Eagle ranked. And Ryan says he thinks Boss is the best night ride at Six Flags St. Louis. I personally go back and forth on whether I like Boss at night or Screaming Eagle at night more. Both are really good night rides and easily the top 2 night rides in the park for sure. The problem with Boss's night ride, even though it goes a lot faster, Screaming Eagle does not have a mid-course that kills the speed, where Boss does. And on top of that, there's less light along Screaming Eagle's layout, so it's darker for a lot of the time. Ryan said there's some really good airtime in the back of the train, which I do agree with, but also the step up into the first turn way out in the woods in the front row, that can give some really good airtime, especially if the ride is flying. And this year, I've also noticed that the laterals on some of the turns, most notably the turn that runs right next to the Boss's lift hill, I noticed that the laterals on that turn were way stronger than they were last year. Like, last year I don't remember them being quite as strong, but this year they were like ridiculous, and I was really impressed with how good this ride was running. And on top of that, it did get some track work, which helped. Seeing as Screaming Eagle is the coaster that got me into being an enthusiast, like, we would not be recording this video right now if it wasn't for Screaming Eagle. Well, for me personally, but no matter how many times I ride Screaming Eagle, this thing is always leaving a huge smile on my face every single time, and it deserves a top 3 spot for the coasters at Six Flags St. Louis.
And the top 2. My number 2 coaster just got bumped. Our last visit together just got bumped from number 1 to number 2. And my number 2 is American Thunder.
And actually, I'm gonna hold them right there. It's actually a couple minutes to go. But yeah, it recently did get bumped down to number 2, so anyway, go ahead.
I'm sad to see it go because that was the first coaster I rode at Six Flags St. Louis.
Wait, you actually rode that before Pandemonium and River King?
I rode American Thunder before I rode those other two. Yes.
Wow, I had never known that. Well, you learn something new every day, so there you go.
And I just loved it. Like, it was my favorite coaster until I got to Silver Dollar City, which we'll mention that in a different video.
Yeah, because I was recently at Silver Dollar City a couple weeks ago, but hardly, like, none of the coasters were open. I think it was, like, only, like, Fire in the Hole and Thunderation. So I didn't get to ride Outlaw Run or any of the other rides. And then, Ryan, you haven't been there since 2018.
2019.
Oh, yeah, 2019. Sorry,
March.
you go to me.
So, American Thunder. It's always been my favorite wooden coaster at Six Flags St. Louis. There's a good reason why, because I say this coaster has the most airtime of any coaster in the park. It's powerful, too. My best rides ever from American Thunder came in 2019 Fright Fest.
Oh, I remember those rides. Those were absolutely insane.
It was flying, and there was ejector pretty much on every hill. It's never run the same since. But the last ride of the season I got was on American Thunder, and it was the last ride of the season in general for the park. It was running very good. I got a back row night ride, and the pops off the fan curve is really strong in the back. The drop's really strong in the back. The first turnaround after the drop is very good in the front row. The double down is one of my favorite elements on the ride, and those ending bunny hills are very good. And not to mention the laterals this thing pulls. It's got a lot of force going into it, but it has just got outclassed recently.
I've completely forgot to mention the laterals that American Thunder has. Like, there's this one unbanked turn right before the 3 bunny hills. That is probably the strongest lateral moment on the entire ride for me. Like, it's ridiculous.
So what's your number 2?
My number 2 coaster is Mr. Freeze. There's one thing I really like about Mr. Freeze, and that is how consistent it is. This thing is consistently really, really good. Like, oftentimes I think it's run the best out of all the coasters in the park, but I personally do not have it ranked as the number 1 coaster in the park. There are so many things that Mr. Freeze does well. The backwards launch is good, but it's definitely not the best launch I've experienced. And in fact, I would argue that the launch on Mr. Freeze at Six Flags Over Texas is stronger than this one. I think the very front and the very back row are equal in terms of quality, at least for a reverse blast freeze, because I haven't done Over Texas's freeze, and that one recently got turned forwards again. But I do think that the very front and the very back are definitely must-dos on Mr. Freeze because both have their advantages over the other. The back row is better for the trip out, which includes the inverted top hat and then the massive vertical spike. And then the return trip is definitely better in the front because the overbank feels way more intense up front. And on top of that, you have the wind power blasting you, which makes the return trip feel all the more insane. Believe it or not, it also has delivered the best hang time moment we've ever experienced. And Ryan will emphasize on that more in a little bit. But you probably can understand where this is going. But if not, you'll have to wait and see what Ryan says about it. But anyway, Mr. Freeze, overall, such a blast no matter how many times I ride it. And I know the pun entirely unintended since it is called Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast. I just feel like I can't put it at my number 1 spot because that other coaster that is my number 1 is just too strong.
And my number 1 is Mr. Freeze. I had this coaster ranked at number 4 before the season started, but it just kept getting better and better, and the launch kept getting faster and faster. We've gotten some over launches lately that plunged it way up in my list. And now it's a top 40 ride for me. That's crazy because I've ridden 275 coasters, and something at my home park would rank that high. The launch out of the station, best backwards launch I've ever experienced.
The only other backwards launch coaster that I think we've done, well, I mean, I've done Freeze it over Texas, but we've also done a Superman Escape from Krypton at Six Flags Magic Mountain.
Yes.
But that backwards launch is nowhere near as good as Mr. Freeze's.
No. And it's punchy too. And when you're in the back row and you look backwards, it feels like a forwards launch, and it's a whole different experience. So you get blasted, and then you hit this very strong positives when you go up that inverted top hat. So then you basically get ejector going into the top hat. Then you get a little bit of hang time, and then you get whipped going back down it. Then the overbank going into the spike isn't like anything too special, but then you plunge up that spike and go way up there, and then you're just looking straight down at the ground, and it feels like a dive coaster a little bit. And then you plunge, and then you whip through the overbank, and it really hauls through it.
One thing I forgot to mention when I discussed Mr. Freeze, sometimes when in the back row, if it feels like it's going into the spike a little bit normal, like sometimes it might be going really slow, and all of a sudden the LIMs just shoot the train up the spike like ridiculously fast, and it's wild when that happens.
And when you hit the trim brake, you know you're in for a treat because that means it's running ridiculous. Last time we visited together, or
It was a couple visits ago.
second time to last time we visited, we got a night ride on it in the front row, and the park was closed by this time. Then they sent us again 2 more times, even after the park was closed. So thanks to the staff at Six Flags St. Louis for doing that, because you didn't need to, but that really pushed it to being my number 1 coaster at the park. What we were mentioning about the hang time.
Oh boy.
Last year, we had a very fortunate circumstance happen where we got a rollback.
Yes, you heard it from here. We got a rare rollback on Mr. Freeze back row.
Back row was the best row to get because we were upside down the longest out of anyone.
Yeah, like the way the train positioned, the back car, like keep an eye, he and I were in the very back car. We were positioned perfectly upside down, and we were stuck for like 3 seconds, and the hang time was unreal. Like by far the best hang time moment ever. Like
That we've ever had.
And we've also done like full throttle, but
Copperhead Strike, better than Copperhead Strike, better than Full Throttle, better than
anything basically.
Any other hang time moment.
And the funny thing is, I called it like 15 minutes earlier because we rode the front row of the other train because they were running 2 trains that night. We rode front row of the train that did not roll back, and before we slid over to launch, I was like, imagine if we get a rollback. And then 15 minutes later, we did on the opposite train. That was hilarious. And then on top of that, the ride valid later that night. So, that was wild.
So that's my number 1. And what's your number 1?
If it isn't already too obvious by now, number 1, it's the Boss. The sense of speed on the Boss is absolutely insane, and that is the sole reason why it is my number 1 coaster in the park. Yeah, Mr. Freeze does go faster, but the Boss, it just feels way faster in general because it goes 66.3 miles an hour. It feels like you're going at least 80 or something. Like, it's wild. And front row is easily the best row for this ride, like hands down. Like, the back row can be really good for airtime, but in my honest opinion, I think the front row has better airtime than a lot of the elements.
It's also a little rough in the back as well.
A little rough. Like, it can be really rough in the back.
It can be really
front,
rough.
It's not that bad. And, like, we have gone some rides without the mid-course slowing the train down, and whenever that happens, the second half is wild, because the last few years, the mid-course was trimming the train quite hard, and it oftentimes was even coming to a dead stop before resuming. I don't think it really did that at all this year from what I've noticed.
No, it didn't.
I don't recall getting a ride where the ride dead stopped on the mid-course. Like, it was doing that a few times last year, but not really this year. It was actually trimmed quite a bit lighter than normal, which that really improved the second half of the ride. And the double up before the fountain breaks, that is especially good in the front row. There have been a few incidents where, like, the trees have overgrown a little bit, so I've accidentally, like, slapped a tree branch, some of the leaves on part of the ride, which is hilarious. And the Boss does not need the RMC treatment. Like, if you're gonna do something to it, give it the Ghost Rider treatment at most. Like, that's really all it needs. Because it's good the way it is. It just doesn't need to be RMC'd. Like, yeah, some track work would be nice. Like, it actually did get some at the bottom of the drop off the mid-course this year, which was nice. But I still think that the Boss needs to stay as it is for as long as possible. So, this thing is overall, like, a wild, wild ride. And front row, rain, night rides during Fright Fest are on another level. Like, those are like my last rides I had on Boss for the season, and it was ridiculous because it was going ridiculously fast in the first half. Keep in mind, the mid-course was barely trimming at all, so it felt like a trimless ride all over again, and it was absolutely insane. While I do miss the old Helix at the end of the ride, the double up is a lot better without the Helix because the train absolutely flies to that last turn and then just rockets over that double up as it tries to throw you out of the train, and it's absolutely insane. Brian says that American Thunder has the most airtime in the park. I think that American Thunder might have the largest quantity of airtime. I think that the Boss has the best airtime in terms of quality, because it's really strong airtime you're getting on this thing. Especially since all you have is the lap bar. And this makes you feel really open, because the PTC trains that Screaming Eagle has are really, like, restrictive, I guess, because you don't feel as open, whereas with these Gerstlauer trains, even though a lot of people don't like them, I personally like these Gerstlauer trains.
I really like them too because it's only a single position lap bar and it's very exposed.
Yeah, but on top of that, it can come down further on you during the ride, but for me, that's not a big deal breaker because I don't think the ride was really built for airtime like Ryan said it was. I think it was built for, like, intensity and speed. And that is why Boston went number 1. Like, and that concludes our top 9 coasters at Six Flags St. Louis. And we did not think of an official name for this series or not, but we'll have to think of that. And since this was our first attempt at it, we know it's probably not the best, but feel free to comment both what you would like to see us do in the future. Like, give us some other video topics to do. I know we were considering doing, like, our favorite coasters at Holloway World because we've both been there recently, but
We realized the same list.
yeah, like, let's go over that real fast. Like we have a Howler at 5, then Raven, Legend, Thunderbird, then Voyage. So there really wouldn't be no point in making a video about that because they're basically the same. So if you guys have any suggestions for different discussion topics we could do for another series like this, please comment down below and we'll figure out which other ones we could do in the future. And since that is all for this video, we hope you guys enjoyed watching, and before you click on this video, please make sure to leave a like and be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. We will continue to post content like this frequently throughout the off season because no parks are open, so we gotta think of something else to do. And so this is what we thought of. So we thank you guys again for watching, and we'll see you later.